Hello, everyone. If I were to ask you, how are you feeling? How are you doing? What would you say? Would you say you're somewhat depressed? Would you say you're a little bit anxious? Are you stressed? Do you know why? Do you know what the root of that is all about? How long has it been that way? And if you don't make a change, how long could it be that you stay like that? What's the root of that, or one of the key roots? Do you know? Would you be able to answer that? If you're in counseling, has your therapist helped you identify what that is within the first few sessions? Well, we're here to help on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? John Euler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. John has more than 25 years of professional experience helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There is hope. There is a God who loves you and wants to help you find peace and strength. And John Euler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Euler. This is Journey to Healing. Welcome back. We are in the midst of a study, a deep dive into the subject of boundaries. Why? Because boundaries underlies the vast majority of things that we wrestle with, as far as if boundaries are not as they should be. Welcome to the program. If you would like to, and I actually encourage you to go to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab, and you will find an ever-growing repository of these programs. I take the hour program that we do live here on tecntv.com, and I cut them in half, so there's part one and part two of an ever-growing repository of programs that are leading up to where we are today. So if you want the context to understand what we're going to be talking about, because I'm going to be moving pretty quickly, and I recommend you go to the site and review this particular program, because we are going to be covering a lot of information, and it may take a couple of times reviewing this. If this is the first time, or even if you're one of my clients, I strongly recommend it. Go back, take the time, and listen to the content, because this is really going to help speed the healing process up. We're going to cover some of the key issues. And as I have referenced before, inevitably, you will find out how you are doing in terms of overall adjustment, in terms of your mental health, by looking at your boundaries, your ability to speak the truth in a reasonable fashion, to be able to state your preference, to be able to have a voice. Problems happen in relationships as you cannot be honest. If you do not have a relationship based upon honesty, then you don't have a real relationship. You have a one-sided relationship, and we have talked about that in the past. We call that the one-up, one-down relationship. We call that the dump-or, dumpee. If you want to find out to what extent is that going on, to what extent do you have what we are referencing as a pig, that comes out of Matthew chapter 7 and verse 6. Jesus says, "Do not cast your pearls before swine." You can go back and watch the podcast, The Warthog Assessment. That'll give you a good objective indicator, really a checklist to find out, are the relationships in your life, are they healthy, or are you dealing with someone that you shouldn't? And that's really the basis of boundaries, being able to discern who you have in your life. Because if you have someone in your life who is an emotional black hole, the term emotional vampire, I've heard that, right? If someone is taking, if they're sucking the daylights out of you, is instead of pouring energy into you, they are sucking energy out. You find yourself exhausted. Instead of encouraging you, they do what? They discourage you. It is not spiritual to be around a discouraging person if you have the choice. If you have the choice and you stay around that person, you better have a very good reason why, because you and others around you that count on your emotional stability and consistency are going to pay the price. So we're dealing with the subject of boundaries because the root of all stress, really all mental health issues, all counseling issues in one way or another, just shy of an actual organic or genetic issue. So the brain is an organ. Things can happen to it, like traumatic brain injuries or other things. Okay, so just shy of an actual organic issue, you can really take everything down and boil it down to and trace it down to the issues of really a couple things. Boundary issues, unresolved grief and loss, and ultimately, under both of those is the issue of anger. So I hate to tell you, I'll tell you what your issue is. You're angry, but that's okay. Now, as Paul says, be angry, but sin not. Most people do not understand that they are angry. As a matter of fact, you could take virtually all aspects of counseling, and in my estimation, virtually every single client that we're dealing with is angry. They just don't know it. They are disconnected from their emotions, and they've been taught that it's not okay to be angry. So they stuff their stuff, they stuff their feelings, they are disconnected, and so they are, in a way, they're dealing with symptoms. We want to get to the root of it. We want to be able to, for ourselves, or if I'm a counselor, which I am, so the folks that I work with, I don't want to help them manage anything. I want to help them get through it. And the good news is, if you are suffering from any of the major mental health issues, again, just shy of an organic issue that's inherited or genetically traced, you are really dealing with anger, but you're disconnected from it. Okay, so the good news is there's a reason why you are how you are. Me too. The key to resolving your depression, anxiety, panic attacks, compulsions, and addictions, your dysfunctional family dynamics, dealing with the toxic person in your life, breaking free from the crazy making and the gaslighting and what some have called so-called trauma bonding. So there's an answer to all that, is to recognize that all of what you are seeing above ground is really just the tip of the iceberg of what you're dealing with and you're sitting on, and what you've been working to keep at arm's length. Whatever term you want to use, suppression, well, we often use suppression, that we're pushing stuff down, but typically we don't know it. But our bodies will show it. You take your blood pressure, you take your muscle tension, your biorhythm, and you'll find out how you're doing. The key is to become aware of our emotions, and most people are clueless of how they're feeling. They'll say, fine. By the way, that's not an emotion, and you're typically, but we're not just doing fine. If you don't have any responsibilities in life, you might be doing fine. Now, I advocate for us to do fine, but a lot of people, actually the majority of people, are not doing fine. They will say they are. Think about if you go to church and we greet one another and it's appropriate, we say how you're doing, and everybody says, oh, fine. Really? Well, probably not. So we just have a rough time being honest with ourselves and others, and there's a time and a place. I understand when we meet people, it's not appropriate to unload. But if I never have a chance to really share and find somebody that can help me, that can listen, that can empathize, that can sympathize, that can be in there with me, then I may be stuck in my stuff. And I need to be able to identify where those emotions come from, what they mean, and what they're all about. Emotions are neither good or bad, neither pro or con. They just are. They give us information. So if I'm not aware of what my emotions are, and if you want a good film to help educate you on emotions, I recommend the movie Inside Out by, I believe, Pixar, or is it Disney? But the movie Inside Out. Frank Anderson, with the Harvard School of Medicine, was the consultant. He has played a key role in creating a new model of therapy dealing with trauma, and it's called internal family systems therapy. You can look it up on YouTube. There's a lot of different videos. He and Richard Schwartz. And so I recommend that if you really want to begin to get a understanding, a really good basic understanding of emotions, watch the movie Inside Out, because that is based on good science. And you'll find out that we have a lot of parts to us, and if those parts are sort of working cross purposes, we're going to feel what? We're going to feel conflicted. And the good news is the vast majority of us on the inside of our parts really are working for us. But if you've ever found yourself doing something that you regret, if you find yourself acting in ways that sabotage your success, you can criticize yourself all you want. Let me ask you, how well is that going to work? Typically, you cannot criticize yourself into better performance. Ask a professional athlete. That's why they have psychologists. They have sports psychologists on their teams. What does a sports psychologist do, by the way? He really helps an athlete get out of his own way. When an athlete starts to get stuck in his head, when he gets in a rut, why is he in a rut? Well, his performance is suffering, but I'll tell you what he does. He shifts from right brain to left brain. He's got the skills down, but now he's not in the groove. He's not in the flow. He's not relaxed. And so now he is tripping over himself. So a sports psychologist really will help the athlete in one way or another begin to relax and get out of his head and get into that flow that he knows so well. So once he gets back into the natural flow of things, he'll do just fine. So it's that self-critic that will cause us to sabotage ourselves. But if we understand that there's a part of us always trying our best for those that are reasonable. Now, we're going to look at some issues dealing with predators here in a moment. But for the vast majority of people that would watch this program, they typically care about themselves and others. And so just know that self-critic is not going to, that's not the method to help you begin to motivate yourself. It's really, strangely enough, beginning to lighten up on yourself. There's a time and a place, though, for self-control, and we have to have that all the time. But if I am getting down on myself like a drill sergeant, then the amount of stress is moving from productive stress to what? To unproductive, and you will find that you start to procrastinate, by the way. So the root of procrastination is not laziness, it is actually fear. So there you go, that's free of charge. To understand how to identify and resolve the underlying issues, we have to pay attention to the role that our emotions play in helping us identify truth. That's really what's going on. There's something under the surface, and it's just beyond my reach. That's why in Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24, David says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart." Long before Freud, so 3,000 years ago, David knew there was something just beyond his reach. He could not get at it. If he could, he wouldn't have needed to pray about it. So there's something going on. There's something very real. Now, it may be imaginary, but until I know that, it's still very real. So I have to be able to identify it. I have to be able to figure out what is a part of me believing so that ultimately I can be set free, because the truth will do what? It will set us free. Free to experience peace, experience rest. Isn't that what we all long for? And experience your sense of purpose, which will bring back your natural motivation, your creativity, and your ability to have patient endurance and staying power. Patient endurance is part of the growth process, but I'll tell you what, there's a big difference between trying to have patient endurance when you have a purpose versus when you have no purpose. Then the kind of patient endurance you may be going through, it may not be patient endurance, but may be discouragement. And now you're just kind of stuck in the mud. So there's a big difference. Patient endurance typically has to do with I'm dealing with life and I'm dealing with people that I don't have a choice. And so I am maintaining consistent or long-term obedience in the same direction. So here's how to understand how we work and how our emotions work so that we can begin to understand the importance of boundaries. Okay, so we're going to take the most common type of disorder that people have, that they experience, which is really anxiety. The two most common issues are anxiety and depression. If you've ever sought counseling out, it's probably going to be for one of those reasons, unless somebody has sort of forced your hand, and then you are a reluctant client, and then you're probably irritated, but you're not anxious or depressed. But anxiety is better understood. So, ready? Here's how to understand this. You're not so much anxious as you are adrenaline-filled. If I tell you you have an anxiety disorder, what are you supposed to do with that? I'll tell you what you're supposed to do with it. You're supposed to manage it. I don't want you to manage your anxiety disorder. Now, if you're on medication, don't do anything radical with my message right now, but I want you to know that there's hope. If you're not on medication, that's still fine. I don't want someone to really, although it's the term in psychology and psychiatry, it comes out of the DSM, or we use that, this book right there. Okay, look how thick this thing is. Do you know how many? Look at that thing, the DSM-5. Okay, it has all the billing codes. It has everything under the sun in there. So there's an entire category called anxiety disorders and mood disorders. So I understand the term, and yes, I diagnose and all of that. But the reality is this. The DSM comes from a medical model, and what it looks at people, it looks at people through the lens of the bell-shaped curve. How are they doing? Are they normal or abnormal? Well, depends upon whose definition. Okay, but if you have an abnormal degree of anxiety, the book will say that you have an anxiety disorder. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with the term, but I don't want people to just have to manage their anxiety. I say, let's get through this. I like the movie Patton, where somebody comes to Patton in the midst of, I think, the Battle for Palermo. I think I'll have to go back and watch it, but they say, "Sir, we're holding the line," or "We're holding," and he says, "We're not holding anything." And so that's really who I am when it comes to therapy. I'm very patient. I think my clients will attest to that, but I have received feedback that they say, how do you help move me along? You seem to do that, and I'm not even aware of that. That's because I'm always heading somewhere with my clients. And where am I heading? I'm heading to help them understand themselves and understand they have emotions, and their emotions mean something. And through the stair-step process that we're going to outline here in a moment, they can begin to identify what it is. So if I tell you have an anxiety disorder, you're simply probably just going to have to manage it. You're going to do meditation. And by the way, Eastern meditation doesn't really work. It's important to become mindful, true, and there's really nothing wrong with meditation. But if that's what you're relying upon to keep yourself calm, you're going to find that you have to meditate more and more and more. Why? Because there's an issue you're not getting at. And so all the symptoms are coming up, and you're trying to tell yourself it's okay, or in some fashion. And I'm not minimizing meditation, but if that's the answer, it's never going to work. And that's why there's programs out there that say, hey, take your meditation to the next level. Really? I thought meditation was simply emptying your mind. By the way, you can't empty your mind. We were never designed to do that. Part of the concern, by the way, in one facet of it, is that comes out of the occult. And if you empty your mind, the next step, sometimes you'll hear them say, listen to that voice, inner voice of wisdom. I want to caution you. Now, getting back to the subject, though, the problem with meditation is this. If you are highly anxious and you meditate, what are you finally doing? It's probably something you've been needing to do as far as this. You're starting to get still. Well, in the stillness, guess what's going to happen? All the stuff is going to come to the surface like volleyball underwater. And so if I tell someone the answer to their anxiety is to meditate, I've put them in a catch-22 because now they're getting still. We need to get still. But it depends upon why I'm getting still. If I'm just trying to get still for stillness' sake, not going to work. The only people that can really successfully meditate are those that shirk all their responsibilities and go join the Buddhists in the Himalayas. And then the people from Harvard will come and study your blood pressure and say, see, meditation works. Well, anybody can meditate and lower the blood pressure if they can check out of life for a couple of years and just go meditate and stare at their navel. Now, again, I'm not down on meditation. I'm simply saying that isn't the answer. The answer actually is filling your mind. is beginning to find out what is true and beginning to think about that. But in order to bring the anxiety down, you have to find out what is true. So what is true about your anxiety? It is not simply a random checklist of things. It is this. It is adrenaline. Okay? If you are anxious, if you can begin to reassociate or replace the word anxiety with, you've just got a bunch of adrenaline. See, if I tell you you have an anxiety disorder or you're anxious, what are you supposed to do with that? You're supposed to manage it. If I tell you you're filled with adrenaline, what can you do with that? Now you can begin the next process of trying to figure out where's the adrenaline coming from. And I'll tell you exactly where it's coming from. It's coming from your adrenal glands because they've been triggered by your brain, probably your right brain, to alert you to some kind of threat to your well-being, stability, or safety. So there's a part of you that has kicked into the fight-flight syndrome, and you don't know it. All you know is you're feeling the effects of this adrenaline. You've got these RPMs going on. So the question is, why is a part of you, without you knowing it, in the fight-flight syndrome? Because a part of you, in one way or another, is experiencing boundary violations. Meaning a part of you feels backed into a corner. Why? Because your boundaries are being encroached upon, and therefore you feel and that's the basis of trespassing, by the way. So a part of you feels that you are emotionally losing control, you're losing your grip, you can't keep it together, you can't get it together, you're pushed against a wall, you're backed into a corner, you see something slipping away from your grip, and you're being forced to give up something that is yours or should be yours, and your voice and your preferences are being silenced or ignored or negated, and you're being overwhelmed by the choices and decisions and effects of others. You are feeling unprotected, and you are being required to sit there and take it. That's a list, all of which has to do with boundaries. So somehow, you are being encroached upon, you're being pushed back into a corner, or you're losing your grip. Either one of those are self-injurious. So you're being hurt by degree. You're being put in a position you never should have been. That is an assault upon self. It can happen over time. It can be like the Chinese water torture, little by little by little. But either way, a part of you is being negatively impacted by something, and it's typically a person, a situation brought about by a person, and you aren't able to change it. So that's kicking in the fight-flight syndrome. That is triggering the adrenaline or adrenal glands, therefore they're pumping in adrenaline, and now you are feeling the effects of that. So you're not as much anxious as you are what? As you are the flip side of hurt, something self-injurious, being pushed into a corner. The flip side of hurt is anger. Anger will trigger the adrenal glands, so you are angry. If you are depressed, what's happened is this. You've had to push your anger down far enough and long enough to where all your energy now has gone into doing that. And how much energy does a depressed person exhibit? 0. So depression, the vast majority of the time, is anger pushed downward. How about a panic attack? It's a sudden discharge of adrenaline from the anger that's under the surface, but it's disconnected. So again, you have anger. How about compulsions? Compulsions are the way that I channel off anger and keep it submerged. So the greater pain wins out. So sex, drugs, rock and roll, shopping, sports, whatever it is, including religious activity. Churches pastors need to be very cautious from keeping people busy or about keeping people busy all the time. That is not healthy. I have an issue. So pastors need to be very mindful not to burn their people out. That is not spiritual, by the way. We don't have two choices, to rust out or burn out. We want to be able to go the distance. Thank you. And how about it? So if you are compulsive, especially emotional eating, what is emotional eating? It is a part of me that is using food. That food has become associated with emotions, and now I'm managing my emotions through food, but I'm disconnected from those emotions, so I think my issue is food. And it's actually not. It's the emotions under the surface. That's the most difficult one because of all issues, you have to eat. And so for those that wrestle with that, it's the most difficult of all. And how about an addiction? Well, once an addiction gets going, there's an actual chemical involved, but how about before the addiction started? Whatever you used to become addicted, the question is, what was going on at the time? And you either were trying to manage your adrenaline in one way or another. So you're either trying to bring yourself down. So you got two categories of drugs, basically. Those that get you down and those that get you up. Uppers and downers. And then once you start using one too much, now you need the other because now you're affecting brain chemistry. So if your category of drug of choice, whatever that is, sometimes also food, if your drug of choice is bringing you down, the question is this: what's going on that things are too much? And ultimately, it's boundaries. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with people. Okay, if you were on a tropical island by yourself, you never have to use drugs or any other kind of mood-altering substance or chemical or activity. Why? Because everything would be copacetic and you could meditate. Okay, so if you're going for a downer, that means there's too much of something, and therefore you're just trying to manage it and you need a break. If you need something to get you up, the question is, what's happening that you're either so burned out, but actually it's probably this. What happened in life to where there's not as much vivid color and enthusiasm? Where did your natural enthusiasm go? Your desires and dreams and hopes, where did they go? They started to become dull. And the question is, when did that start to take place? And because you had to give a part of that up, a part of you is angry. So again, anger is under the surface. So anger stems from, so again, when we're dealing with pretty much all the psychological or emotional issues, you look at under the surface and we have anger going on. Now, where's the anger come from? Either legitimate or illegitimate boundary violations. Now, let me define what I just meant, meaning there's boundary violations and now I'm angry. Now the question is, who's crossing whose boundaries? If somebody is crossing my boundaries, I'm going to be legitimately angry. But if I'm used to crossing somebody else's boundaries and they put limits on me, I'm going to be angry. So in a way, we have both categories of people, the dump wars and the dumpees that tend to be angry. But the question is why? So the dump war actually tends not to be angry unless somebody puts limits on them. But you want to look at when somebody's angry, when somebody's depressed, when somebody has all those symptoms, you want to look at where's the anger coming from. And typically a selfish person isn't going to involve themselves in counseling too much unless it's strategic to be able to show people they went to counseling or to be able to manipulate the counselor against their spouse. That happens a lot. Anger stems from either legitimate or illegitimate boundary violations, sometimes perceived boundary violations, but you still have to check that out. Okay, legitimate anger, somebody has transgressed against me. Illegitimate, somebody's placed limits on my self-entitlement, on what I feel I'm entitled to. This is actually the pig. Okay, and the issue that is at stake is what is rightfully the other person's on the other side of their boundaries. So you can have two people that are in a relationship and both are angry. One wants to presume more, the other wants the person to stop. So both can be upset, but one can be a pig, the other is not a pig. Okay, if you have suffered a loss, and so here's going to be another issue that can bring anger up. So if you've suffered a loss, either from natural or unnatural causes, we call it natural, but in a way there's nothing natural about loss. But that is, we call them natural loss, but we live in a fallen world. So other than normal stages of death and dying, everything else, and that's unnatural, everything else is really due to people's choices and decisions. So we're then dealing with what I call unnatural loss, but it really has to do with people's choices and decisions that are now impacting me. So I need to go through the grief and loss process and come to terms with the loss. That's the only way I'm going to be able to attend to my anger. I have to go through those stages. Since time does not heal all wounds, I have to take the time to process the loss. If I don't, or if I can't, then the wound will fester and it will become an emotional infection, which will be seen in the form of, or it'll take the form of, buttons and triggers, and other forms can be emotional reactivity, including an inability to become still and quiet. Also, it can go underground and it can become low-grade depression. We're going to look at what are some of the most profound kinds of losses, and then we're going to look at what are the most profound kinds of people that create the most profound kind of loss and the most profound kind of anger within us. And we will look at that on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by John Euler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with John Euler about your situation or in having John conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.